Thank you for attending Building an Inclusive Economy for Planet and People, hosted by the Plastic Bank. I'm Ryan Thomas, CEO of EM Vaccines and Immunotherapeutics and Special Advisor to the Plastic Bank. I think Peter will be showing a video here for a couple of minutes as we wait for other folks to join.
Okay, can you see the video?
Yes, no sound though.
No, it has no sound.
All right. So as folks are joining, we'll have this little video playing in the background. For those of you who have not used GoToMeeting in the past, there should be a little bit of a control bar here on the left-hand side. You'll see that there's a section for questions and for chat. We encourage participants to actively participate by typing in any questions that they have, any comments that they would like to make. We'll be collecting those questions as the webinar advances, and I'll be proposing those questions to our different speakers towards the end of the webinar. So we'll just wait another minute or two here as folks continue to trickle in. This is a nice little video here. Peter, did you put this together?
Yes, I did. Good.
Can you provide a little commentary where these pictures were taken?
Well, this was from the World Cleanup Day in Brazil, where we collected about 600 kilos at the Copacabana.
Great. All right, Peter, whenever you want me to get started here.
Yes, it's 1 more minute, and then once it's done, I think we can start.
Okay, great. And again, for those of you who are just joining us, thank you. We are happy to have 3 panelists today joining us, and we'll speak a little bit more about their background in a moment here. For those of you who have not used GoToWebinar, again, there is a little control panel on the side here. We encourage you to write in with your questions and your comments. We'll collect those and pose them to our panelists at the end of the webinar. All right, Peter.
Yes, go ahead, Ryan.
Okay. Thanks again for joining. Again, I'm Ryan Thomas, CEO of EM Vaccines and Immunotherapeutics, and as Special Advisor to the Plastic Bank, I'll be your host and moderator for this webinar. Apologies in advance for my my voice, as I'm recovering from a little sickness here. Now, as we talk about an inclusive economy, I think it's important for us to remember that decades ago, the business world really had fully embraced this idea of greed for good. And by harnessing the power of people's greed, there was a belief that market forces would produce the best, most efficient outcomes based on consumer preference and demand. But as we fast forward to today in 2021, I think you'll find that most world leaders will tell you that theory has failed us. While these last few decades have certainly produced enormous amounts of wealth and technological advancements, pulling countless millions out of extreme poverty, greater iniquities have been created and certainly a lot of damage to our planet. In my own world of vaccines, we can clearly see this impact on the access to safe, effective vaccines in the developing world. Historically, pandemics have caused great shifts in geopolitical and economic power. Today, we're experiencing something similar. Economists warn us that supply chain shortages will continue for the next year, and scientists believe that we will have additional COVID waves. So the question of building a more inclusive economy for people and planet is more relevant than ever. Pope Francis reminds us that authentic development cannot be restricted to economic growth alone, but must foster the growth of each person and of the whole person. This means more than balancing budgets, improving infrastructures, or offering a wider variety of consumer goods. Rather, it involves a renewal, purification, and strengthening of solid economic models based on our own personal conversion and generosity to those in need. An economic system detached from ethical concerns does not bring about a more just social order, but leads instead to what Pope Francis calls a throwaway culture of consumption and waste. Today, we have the privilege of welcoming three special guests: Dr. Rachel Mash, Network Coordinator of the Green Anglicans; Esha Mufti, Program Director of the Council for Inclusive Capitalism; and Dr. Peter Nitschke, Director of Community Partnerships at Plastic Bank. So the agenda for the rest of this webinar will be transitioning between each of our panelists here. We'll start with Dr. Rachel Mash, and we'll give them an opportunity to present on their specific area of expertise. And then we'll transition to the next speaker. And as I mentioned early on in this webinar, we encourage questions and comments through the question button on the GoToWebinar control panel. So without further ado, we welcome Dr. Rachel Mash. She is the coordinator of the Environmental Network of the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. This includes South Africa, Eswatini, I'm not doing great on these names, Lesotho, Angola, Namibia, and Mozambique. She is on the Faith for Earth task team on pollution. So welcome, Dr. Mash.
Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be with you this evening. I'm coming in all the way from Cape Town, and great to be part of this exciting event and some really interesting panelists. I'm going to just show my screen and hope that it's going to come up. Can you just let me know if you can see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So the topic for this evening is we're going to be looking at an inclusive economy for planet and for people. Let me see if this is going to move. Okay, so now, okay. So an inclusive economy means that we must be leaving no one behind. Now, South Africa, where I live, is probably the most unequal country in the world, according to the Gini coefficient. And this is one of the pictures of an area south of Cape Town. You can see on the left-hand side the density of the homes, and on the right-hand side, vast areas where people live. And if you just look at this picture, it also gives you an idea of the amount of resources that the different communities are using, from the water of the swimming pools and the watering of the lawns to the amount of land that is used and the amount of energy that is used to keep these homes going. So who is being excluded from this economy? I think one of the first people that we find in our setting is that young people are being excluded from the modern economy. And we have one of the highest rates of unemployment among young people. And we recently in July had some really bad rioting around the KZN area. And it was particularly the areas where there was the highest numbers of young people where people were rioting. Coming out of COVID, many jobs have been lost, but it's also because of the global economy and the emphasis that is made on the rich. And we find that the economy we've been fed the myth of the trickle down, that if rich people were giving tax breaks, their businesses would grow. And as the pie got bigger, each person would have a larger slice. But the opposite has happened. Instead of wealth trickling down, it's now flowing up. The poor pay interest on loans and the rich gain interest. So an inclusive economy must include everybody in the economy. Not only are young people being pushed out of the global economy, but their future is also at risk because of the impact on the environment and on the planet. And I was very struck by this poster from a recent youth activist march in Cape Town, which said, "You will die of old age and your kids will die of climate change." So we look at the current economy and the damage it's doing to the planet. We also need to talk about intergenerational injustice, because this economy is destroying the futures of young people. When we talk about an inclusive economy, we also need to think about the inclusion of indigenous people. We know that most of the fossil fuel companies and the explorations are impacting on indigenous people and on rural people. And very often rural people don't have paperwork to say this is our land. And so the fossil fuel company can push them off. And although indigenous people comprise less than 5% of the world population, they protect 80% of the Earth's biodiversity in the forests, deserts, and grasslands and marine environments for which they have lived for centuries. And they also have a different relationship with the Earth. As this poster says, they are committed to defending the sacred. They have an intimate relationship with the Earth rather than the extractive relationship with the Earth that typically our economy will have. And I was reminded of the story in the Old Testament. We read of King Ahab, who was an incredibly wealthy king, and there was Naboth, who had a small vineyard next to the king's land. And King Ahab decided that he wanted that land, and he offered Naboth all kinds of inducements to give him his land. But Naboth replied and said, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my ancestors." And this is the relationship of the land that is being destroyed by fossil fuel companies, by mining companies, by the extractive industry. And under extractive industry, we must also place agriculture, because agriculture is not healing the land. Agriculture is an extractive industry taking out from the land. And we know that many forests are being cut down in order to provide more land for agriculture. And this doesn't want to move forward. Okay. So when we talk about faith and the economy, it's important that we remember that we have one common home. And the earth is the household that we share together. Now, in Greek, the word for home is oikos. So we can talk about the oikos of God, the home of God. And oikos nomos means the rules of the household. So the economy is the rules of the household. It's the rules how we live this home. And so our oikos nomos, the rules of our household, need to be tested against the principles of justice. And we know that the Bible has more than 2,000 verses which speak about the poor. So then a related word for oikos is oikos logia, which is ecology, which is the study of the household. So here we can see the intimate relationship between oikos logia, the study of this common home, and oikos nomos, the rules for this common home. So there's a fundamental connection between ecology and economy. And in the famous saying, whatever befalls the earth befalls the children of the earth. And one of our major problems is that we have divided the economy from the ecology, and the impacts of our economic choices are being outsourced onto the ecology, and they are not being paid by the person who is producing the pollution. So we need to go back to the principle of polluter pays. Ecology and economy are two interconnected perspectives on God's household of life. So ecology is the study of the relationship between creatures and the ecosystems that sustain them. For example, do we see a forest as a financial resource which can be cut down because we need funds? Do we see it as our home, which provides food, shelter, medicine, and fuel for generations to come? The current economic system, which is based on unlimited growth, is having a disastrous effect on this earth. And Bishop Zach of Uganda says this: what went wrong, looking at the start of the Bible in Genesis, when Adam and Eve were thrown out of the garden, they were thrown out of this beautiful planet garden. What went wrong is very clear. It's humanity. Humanity went beyond the boundaries. They ate beyond the limits. That is what greed is about. And the tragedy with our world today, greed is so systemic, it's so engraved in the global economies, and it's bred inequalities, and it's also bred the abuse of the environment and the abuse of nature. And we can see that we are eating beyond the boundaries. Every year we celebrate World Overshoot Day. I think this year it was about August the 22nd. And for the rest of the year, we are eating the resources of the years to come. We are eating the resources of our children and our grandchildren. So then, how can we talk about a green, inclusive economy? I think one of the important things when we think about an inclusive economy is that it needs to be decentralized and it needs to spread wealth. So I've put this picture here of a small farm which has got solar panels. They're generating a little bit of income, they're producing power. Communities can produce renewable energy. A school can produce renewable energy and sell it into the grid. A farmer can see solar energy as another income stream for the farm. An old age home can produce energy and help to offset their costs. And I believe that one of the challenges and one of the possibilities of this move to renewable energy is that it can lead to decentralized wealth and to reduce the gap between the poor and the rich. If we think of the movements in history, the movement of the coal era led to the trade union movement. Why? Because workers were so necessary that they become empowered. And we're actually finding a little bit of that now in the recovery from COVID-19, that workers are needed. For instance, in the States, they're saying like workers are now pushing for better wages because they're saying you guys need us. So the coal era led to strengthening of the trade union movement. What did the oil and gas era lead to? It led to a huge increase in inequality and the phenomena of the 1%, because people are able to buy shares and stocks in oil and fossil fuels, and they're not seeing the impact of that on their own environment and on workers' wages. So the question that I want to pose to us this evening is to say, can the renewable energy era lead to a more equitable society? If we just allow the massive companies, international companies, to come in and put up massive solar panels, massive wind turbines, then it won't, because once again, the income from the energy production will be going to the big corporations. But if we can push for decentralized green economy, decentralized green energy, there is a possibility that production of energy could lead to a decrease in the gap between the poor and the rich. The final question I wanted to look at was the flourishing of creation. In the Bible and in most of the scriptures of the different faiths, we believe that creation is something beautiful that is made by God. And we read in Genesis of the teeming seas, of the flourishing of the creation. So if nature flourishes, then we will also flourish. I think one of the big things that we've learned from COVID is that if we don't look after this planet, the planet will not look after us. What happened in Wuhan when the virus jumped from one species to another and then to humans can happen again. We face more and more zoonotic diseases, and WWF has said that zoonotic diseases are the boomerang effect of the destruction of ecosystems. So let us look at how we can look after this planet for the flourishing of all creation. Can we include a green, inclusive economy and find ways to fight inequality? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mesh. A very thoughtful presentation, and I can't help but be impacted by several points that you made. This idea of greed also, it just causes me to think, how do we fight greed in ourselves? We do it through gratitude for what we have and generosity. And I think, when we talk about building an inclusive economy, we've got to be grateful for what we have and what the planet offers us, and we've also got to be generous, right? This is not about hoarding for ourselves or taking advantage for ourselves. And I think these two virtues help us not to be self-centered, and to be open to the importance of, just as you described, the care for our common home. So a very beautiful presentation. I encourage our participants again to type their questions and comments in the GoToWebinar control panel for Dr. Mesh. And now we have Esha, who is joining us. She is the program director for the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. In this role, she engages with the Council's partner organizations, including large and small companies, on commitments to the work of inclusive capitalism. She also manages various work streams for these partners to help achieve the Council's overarching goal of creating a more equitable, sustainable, and trusted economic system. Prior to joining the Council, Esha spent almost 7 years at Acumen, a global nonprofit impact investment firm focused on tackling problems of poverty by investing in social enterprises. Most recently, she led impact measurement and management and insights for Acumen. Previously, she engaged with strategic corporate partners and institutions that share Acumen's vision of a world based on dignity, where everyone has an opportunity to thrive. Before Acumen, Esha was at the Stimson Center, a think tank that seeks to promote international security, shared prosperity, and justice through applied research and independent analysis, deep engagement, and policy innovation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan. As Ryan mentioned, I'm now the programs director for the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, and at the Council, we're building a movement of business leaders and leaders from the public sector as well as the nonprofit sector. And specifically for the business sector, we invite council members and organizations to make commitments to inclusive capitalism. So if you have a chance to look at our website, we're building a commitments platform, and this is sort of the membership fee where we ask all of our council members to make at least one commitment to action for inclusive and sustainable capitalism. And then we partner with them to share progress for these. And the idea behind this council platform is that we are building a repository for action so that members from companies across the globe, of companies of any sizes, if they're seeking to take action toward inclusive capitalism, they have a platform where they can look to see what kind of actions their peers are taking to advancing the sustainable development goals, as well as building an economy that's better for people and planet. In addition to these commitments, and here's something that I'd like to talk to you about today, and it really touches on our topic of building an inclusive economy for people and planet. We launched selective work streams, and these are in partnership with council members to really drive collective action on various topics, again, toward building inclusive and sustainable capitalism. And the first of these work streams that we launched, the council is fairly new, we just launched in December 2020. The first of these work streams was focused on just energy transition, really inspired by Pope Francis's call to action to industry to do better and take action again for making the world a better place to live for future generations. We partnered with BP as well as strategic partner BCG to bring together companies in the energy intensive space as well as key stakeholders from the investor perspective and the worker perspective to identify where the council could add value in this space. And I'd love to share a little bit more about this work with you and would welcome your questions. So as I mentioned, and as you all probably know, the energy transitioning from fossil fuel-based systems of energy to renewable systems of energy, as Rachel was just talking about, is a significant opportunity ahead of us. And it's incredibly important to ensuring that the future of the Earth is sustainable and that we actually leave an Earth that's inhabitable by our future generations. However, the work must be done on the part of governments, on the part of policymakers, on the part of companies to also ensure that this transition takes place in a way that's just for the people that are involved. And these are the workers, the communities, as well as the customers. And there's an opportunity here to think through the transition out of the old fossil fuel-based and high carbon systems of energy and the transition into more renewable and low carbon-based systems of energy. And what I mean by this is the International Energy Agency, for example, estimates that the energy transition is poised to create 30 million new jobs that can help offset the 5 million jobs that will be lost. However, if governments, investors, policymakers, and companies don't work together and are deliberate in planning for and implementing a just energy transition, it'll be difficult to ensure that these job opportunities are taking place where they're needed the most, that the workers in the traditional energy systems are equipped and have the right skills for this new energy system. Likewise, for consumers, as we move toward a transition toward net zero energy, it'll be equally important to make sure that we're thinking about universal energy access, and those twin goals are our North Stars, and the transition doesn't happen at the cost of people worldwide gaining access to energy. Similarly, on the community perspective, as this transition takes place, it will be equally important to think through local supply chains, local economies, to make sure that that is really taken into account in terms of any planning and implementation for the transition, so that the people that are most affected by the transition are really sharing in the benefits and the risks to them are mitigated. So with that background context, I'll share a little more about the work stream that we launched at the Council earlier this year. As I mentioned, there's a lot of literature out there on the transition specifically, a lot of initiatives that we view as peer initiatives, a lot of work at the government as well as the industry level that happens at to make sure that the transition is taking place, the Paris Agreement, that there's negotiations at the country level and companies are being encouraged and motivated to do their part. For the just energy transition, there are likewise existing literature and publications on this, but they're largely focused at the policy audience. And so, as I mentioned, in response to Pope Francis's challenge to industry to do more, and in partnership with BCG and BP, we saw a clear need to build upon existing literature and develop a company-focused framework for action. So for companies that are seeking to transition and to contribute to the broader energy transition, to develop this framework to help clarify actions for them in order to ensure that their transition takes place in a way that's just, again, for workers, customers, as well as communities. And so what we set out to do was develop this framework and then also set up a platform for companies to be able to share their commitments. And as I mentioned earlier, this is really the bread and butter of the Council. We ask that companies make public-facing commitments to action, and then we also partner with them to share progress against these to ensure transparency and really make sure that we're bringing organizations along in the journey to do better, and then also build a platform for learning as part of the deliverables for this work stream, so that companies and business leaders have an opportunity to learn from each other in terms of challenges and opportunities as it pertains to the just energy transition. Our guiding principles on this were really to leverage existing material, and the United Nations International Labour Organization has a lot on this. I think the ILO has, especially because of the worker voice that it represents, has done quite a bit of work to put forth frameworks and guidelines in terms of making sure that worker voice is represented and accounted for when managing a transition in this way. So we really leveraged their work as well as other work in the space to create this framework for action for companies. And we collaborated and added to existing efforts so that we weren't duplicating or recreating the wheel. In terms of how we're defining just transition, we are defining it to be the transformation of the global energy sector towards a sustainable net zero emission system, taking into account the social economic impacts on workers, customers, and communities. And one thing that has been really important for us to recognize is that companies are but one stakeholder in this global transition toward net zero. And it will be, for this to be successful, it will be incredibly important for them to partner with government, consumers, communities, labor voices, and other key stakeholders from the very start. So this means from designing any sort of just transition planning to the actual implementation, to make sure that the perspectives and demands and needs of these key stakeholders are represented in any actions that the companies take on this just energy transition. As I mentioned, we took principles, lessons, and inspiration from existing work and expertise, and we developed 7 guiding principles for a just energy transition. The first of which is sustainable future for all. And as I mentioned, we really believe as you are transitioning to net zero, there is a twin goal of wanting to ensure universal energy access, so commitment to universal carbon neutral energy access for consumers. The second one being fair and decent work, so the creation of more and decent jobs alongside adequate and sustainable social protection and the right to bargain for workers. Again, really taking inspiration from the work that the International Labour Organization has done. Worker rights and social dialogue, respect of fundamental rights at work, and promotion of a two-way dialogue, a community-specific approach. And this is specifically in addition to workers, companies engaging with the communities in which they're operating, and with the understanding that there's really no one-size-fits-all solution. Companies will have to really flex to understanding the social, cultural, political realities of where they're operating and design their just transition planning and implementation for the specific conditions and needs of the communities where they're operating. Social consensus and due participation. And so achieving strong social consensus on the goals and pathways to sustainability and enabling environment for all stakeholders to drive the transition. Diversity and inclusion, programs taking into account the strong gender, racial, and socioeconomic dimensions of many environmental challenges and opportunities. Collaboration and transparency, so collaboration not just between businesses, but also between sectors, and evidence-based reporting to promote transparency and not just have companies making commitments to just energy transition, but also sharing their progress and lifting up the hood in terms of sharing what they're doing in terms of action and opening up their information to be assessed by third-party organizations like the World Benchmarking Alliance, as well as the Climate Action 100. So with that inspiration, this is the framework that we have developed. There are 4 pillars to it, as you can see, the first of which is universal net zero energy, the second of which is workforce evolution, the third of which is community resilience, and then the last of which is collaboration and transparency. And within these 4 pillars, we have 2 levels of action. There's a total of 20 building block actions for companies to look to for guidance as they're planning and implementing their just transition. We have a set of core practices, which are largely practices in the environmental, social, and governance space that companies may already be carrying out, but they could be extended to a just energy transition context. And then there's just energy transition specific practices that are more ambitious that companies can take to support a just energy transition in more advanced actions. And so our next steps in terms of this framework are that we'll be releasing this framework and the specific 20 building block actions, as well as examples to illustrate what this looks like in practice at the sidelines of the upcoming COP26 in November. And we've invited companies to also make commitments to just transition related to this framework to strengthen our collective call to action, to invite all companies to use this framework as guidance for how you really manage and implement a transition in a way that's just for the people that are involved, and inviting them to make their commitments on the Council's commitments platform as well. Again, to incentivize this movement toward action in partnership with key stakeholders such as government, labor voices, community perspectives, and really motivating and challenging companies to do more when it comes to transitioning in a way that is just. Right now, the work stream is made up of energy intensive companies such as Repsol, Eni, SSE, Anglo American, as I mentioned, BP. We have representation from emerging markets as well, AC Energy, as well as Reliance. I've just mentioned them previously. State Street and CalPERS offer the investor perspective. ITUC, the International Trade Union Organization, offers a labor union perspective, and we have an academic representation from the Grantham Research Institute. And what we are inviting after the launch roundtable at the sidelines of COP26 is companies not just in the energy sector, the energy intensive sector, but of all sectors that make use of energy in a significant way, or are in the renewable sector to be producing energy in the sort of way of the future, to make sure that they are doing so and managing their own transition in a way that's just, and sharing lessons back with us so that we can incorporate them in our learning platform that we're planning on launching on the sidelines of COP26 as well.
Excuse me, Esha, we cannot see your presentation. Would you stop sharing your screen and reshare, because we only see a white screen.
Oh.
Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely fine.
We thought you were just trying to transmit purity, the white background.
Have you not seen any of the? Have you not seen any of the slides?
We saw some of it, but then it disappeared and then it became white.
Oh, I apologize. So let me actually quickly. I'm not sure what happened there.
But wasn't an analogy?
No. Have you seen these slides?
Not all of them, some of them. In some way, we also cannot really see your whole screen. You only can see a part of it.
Oh, this is very strange. I apologize. I'm trying to go to full screen view for the slides, but it does not seem to be working.
On your PowerPoint, if you put the start presentation from beginning,
that's what I'm in. I'm in presentation view on the PowerPoint, and that's what takes it to the white screen.
Okay, so better than not, don't use the white screen, the presentation.
I apologize. Okay. So I won't go to the presentation view, but I will quickly run through the slides that I think you missed or I missed. This was basically the background when I was talking through, the definition for just transition, and really acknowledging that companies are but one of key actors. And this isn't to abscond responsibility, but really to recognize that companies must partner with these key stakeholders in developing and implementing just transition from the very start. So taking into account how government is planning for just transition in the specific country, the role of consumers as well as workers from the very start, and then continuing to partner with these stakeholders as they implement this just transition. And then I just talked through the guiding principles. I won't say them out loud again because I think you heard them, but I just wanted to reiterate that these are really taken, we took inspiration from existing work, especially from the International Labor Organization, the United Nations, and other key experts in this space, and developed guiding principles for our work streams, just energy transition as well. And here is where I had ended, and this was just, you cannot see this. I just wanted to show you where the framework stands today, but I believe you can only see the last 3 columns for some reason. Is that right? Okay, here's apologies for my technical difficulties, but here I think you can see now what the framework looks like. And as I mentioned, there's 4 pillars: universal net zero energy, workforce evolution, community resilience, collaboration, and transparency. And within these, there's 20 building blocks, which are basically areas of action that we have identified for companies. And the full framework will be available publicly when we release it at the sidelines of the upcoming UN COP26 conference at the first 2 weeks of November. And as I mentioned, there's core practices and just transition specific practices as part of this framework. And when we release this, we're not just offering a framework, but we'll have invited companies that are part of the council to make commitments to action. And together, we believe that the framework, as well as actual examples of action, will make our collective call to action stronger for all companies to be invited to adopt, use the framework as guidance and make their own commitments to just energy transition. And as I was saying, although the workstream itself has energy intensive companies that have participated, we believe that the framework is relevant to companies that are big users of energy, as well as the renewable energy sectors, to see what they can learn from traditional systems of energy to ensure that as the renewable and low carbon energy system is established, it is just for the workers, communities, and customers that are involved. My apologies once more for the technical difficulties. I will stop sharing my screen now, but happy to take any questions from you, Ryan, or the other participants.
Lots of great information. Thank you for sharing with us. I think there's a number of areas that I'd like to follow up on, and perhaps we'll wait till the end here. And Peter's collecting some questions from our participants as well. Again, I encourage you to add your questions and your comments to the GoToWebinar section on the side there. We'll collect those and ask our participants at the end. So thank you so much, Esha, for that overview. We're now going to transition to Dr. Peter Nitschke, Director of Community Partnerships at the Plastic Bank. His topic today will be Stopping Ocean Plastic and Empowering Communities for Regenerative Society. Peter is the Director for Community Partnerships at the Plastic Bank, engaging communities to create value out of plastic. He lived for 20 years in the Philippines, where he pioneered the now thriving Plastic Bank branch there. He was involved in the leadership of several NGOs and academic institutions before returning to Germany in 2018. Peter gained his experience in urban transformation by relocating for 8 years in an urban poor community, living with the people, learning their culture and language, and mobilizing their capacity for transformation and upliftment. Peter?
Yes, hello, everybody. It's great to be here and to talk about the Plastic Bank. Plastic Bank is actually working with Rachel and with Esha. We are part of the United Nations Faith for Earth Coalition, where we work with faith communities, but we are also a member of the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, where we also work with companies who want to make an impact. And so it's great to be in the intersection of those two different worlds, the spiritual and the economy, and they are both connected. I hope you guys can see my screen. Ryan, can you see it? Is it visible?
So I can see it, Peter.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Our vision again is stopping plastic. So I think climate change and plastic pollution are ugly twins, so to speak, and we need to really do all our effort to prevent both of them to progress further. So with plastic, we have a world drowning in plastic, and a lot of this plastic is going into the ocean. There's actually 18 million tons of plastic every year, and that would be like you are piling garbage bags on top of each other. It would be from here to the moon, garbage bags piled upon one another. So that's the garbage that goes into the ocean every year, and that once it's there, it's very, very difficult to get it out. And by 2040, this is going actually to triple. It will be about 30 million tons of plastic every year if we don't change. And that means by 2050, there will be more fish in the ocean than there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish, which is a terrible thing to think about. And some of our plastic collectors are fishermen who sometimes even catch more plastic in the sea than they catch fish. And so our idea is to stop the plastic before it goes into the ocean, or what you would call turning off the tap. And we want to do this in a way that creates environmental, social, and economic impact. So a model that is economical and ecological at the same time. And if you look at this map, you see the ocean plastic hotspots of this world. That means the yellower or the less blue, the more plastic waste is being generated and goes into the ocean. And the Plastic Bank is working in a couple of those countries. We're working in Haiti, we're working in Brazil, we're working in Egypt, in the Philippines, and in Indonesia. And we have collected so far more than 30 million tons of plastic. We mostly work with informal collectors, which are now about 20,000 that are our partners. And by this, we are creating some kind of inclusive capitalism, where we are working with the people who are at the bottom and also the people who are working on the top. And the inclusive economy that we have created in this country is to develop a recycling ecosystem that incentivizes the collectors and the families providing necessities that they need. We are using modern blockchain technology that through a digital ledger monetizes the value chain and creates transparency, traceability, and scalability. So the social plastic feedstock that we are selling is basically a fair trade recycled plastic. And we think recycling is one of the major strategies to stop ocean plastic. If you think about that, only 9% of the plastic that is being produced is being recycled. And we are producing more and more plastic out of crude oil. It's not really making sense. Why don't we recycle the plastic that we are producing and put it back into the economy and create a circular economy instead of a linear one, where you just produce, use, and dispose. We are using a circular one, where then out of this recycled plastic, new products are being created, and we are working with brands like Henkel, like SC Johnson, who buy that feedstock from us. And through this, we are focusing on the sustainable development goals. There are 17, and we are somehow reaching all of them a little bit, but not all of them in the same extent. So our main focus is SDG 1, poverty, and SDG 14, life under the ocean. And there is a big inequality as well in the recycling supply chain, which we're trying to stop by inverting the pyramid and empowering the people who are really the environmental heroes in the communities, the guys who collect the plastic, and give them access to what they need to live a dignified life and work themselves out of poverty. And that is increase the price above the market rate. We have provided people as well with water filters, with saving accounts, with cooking fuel, with fresh food and micro insurance, and we work with them to make sure that their kids also can go to school, especially with in this pandemic. We have distributed thousands of tablets to kids in public schools in the Philippines and Indonesia, so that kids can participate in the online learning that these countries are providing. And so here is the story of two of our heroes who are actually in their 60s, but they are helping their families. They're both from from Indonesia, and their life have improved significantly because of plastic bank. Like Vati can send her grandchildren to school, and then Budiono, who lost his job as a bus driver, is now able to still get enough income to feed his families. And there are thousands of these stories where plastic collection has become a means for people to escape poverty. Now, when we work with companies, there are two kinds of programs that we offer them. One is what we call an impact program, where companies offset plastic that we then collect, plus doing an income that is focusing on other SDGs except 14. Like here we are working with Lombardo Di, one of the oldest Swiss private banks, who have helped to provide access to education to 3,500 children, while at the same time preventing 16 million plastic bottles from entering the ocean. So this is where an inclusive economy is happening, where that helps people on the ground. The other one, of course, is the social plastic, where plastic is being incorporated into the supply chain of companies. Like here is with Henkel, with NatureBox and FA, which are both body care products. And so people buying these products can create an impact that goes much beyond the product itself, but is helping the collector communities where this plastic is collected. So we are now expanding into new countries like Cameroon and also Thailand. And we also have a partnership with schools, where we put up collection points in schools and also in churches, where we are reaching almost 400,000 people who we teach to segregate their waste, and we empower them that the plastic that they are using is not only becoming recycled, but also creates values in their own community. So we think this is some kind of inclusive capitalism, where people and the planet can flourish, because we need to stop ocean plastic and end poverty, as Pope Francis said in his encyclical Laudato Si. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Certainly a lot of very good practical experience and work on the ground to motivate all of us, including those attending here through the audience. Now, Peter, I don't know if you've collected some questions here, but if you could send them to me, perhaps by WhatsApp. I've got a couple of questions that I've collected here. I'd like to go to Esha here for a second.
So far, no questions from the audience. Please, guys, if you have any questions, shoot them in the question. Oh yeah, here is one. Okay. Wait, I shoot them to you, Ryan. Just wait a minute.
Perfect.
You go ahead and.
Thank you. The first question that I have here for Esha, you've mentioned several large and impactful multinational corporations in your presentation. We often hear about the evil that corporations do, but seldom the good things. In your experience, what is motivating these corporations to change attitudes and collaborate with the Council for Inclusive Capitalism?
I think there are, oh, can you hear me? Oh, yes, you can. Sorry, I'm very aware of my technical difficulties now. I think there are a couple of things, and I think you, in your opening remarks, really hit the nail on the head, where a different philosophy was sort of the umbrella philosophy and the motivational philosophy behind capitalism. If you look back 20 or 30 years around greed, profit is great, everything will trickle down, companies and the rich doing well will make sure that everyone else is doing well as well. And I think there's an increased understanding, especially over the last decade and especially over recent years. I think COVID has really underscored that, in that if we're not intentional about how we're designing this economy, how capitalism functions, and the role of business, not just to make profit, but in its responsibility toward the people and planet around which it's operating, towards which it's creating products and services, workers that work in its companies, that this is no longer going to be sustainable. It'll lead to the planetary decline that we're already seeing, but also social unrest. I think also on a personal level, a lot of the people that I engage with at these companies they're coming from various backgrounds. Some have been at companies their whole lives, some are coming from the public sector, some are coming from the civic sector, and are really motivated in engaging with companies at different parts of the journey, whether the companies are already green or really leading in the space, or companies that are still on the start of the journey, to help them move forward and motivate them and challenge them to do more. So I think there's a bigger picture response, but then also a personal level response that I've really learned while at the council and engaging with counterparts at these companies as well.
Excellent. I've got just a follow-up question on that. Is there a goal for the council as far as number of I guess how is the council measuring impact, and what's the goal for the next couple of years?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we, the way that we're measuring progress, and we're actually just setting up this practice, and we'll have more to share details on this at the end of this year. But it's very important for us not just to have a platform where there's just commitments from these companies, but also we're sharing progress for these companies. So what happened, what didn't happen in terms of the targets that you had set out, what was achieved, what wasn't achieved, and then partnering with them to share any best practices and lessons learned that they would like to share publicly. And so where this is still a work in progress, but it looks like we'll at least be sharing annually a reporting on progress for the commitments that we have, as well as working with our council members throughout the year to highlight specific deep dives into not just the what of the actions that they took, but the how-tos. And ideally, we'll be partnering with council members not just to share the successes that they've had, but also the challenges, because I think the openly sharing of challenges can be just as illuminating as sharing of successes and lessons, because it can really show peers and others in the space, how did this company tackle this challenge or face this challenge? What may have worked, what didn't work, and apply that lesson to when they're trying to take bold action for inclusive and sustainable capitalism as well. So we'll have more detail on how exactly we plan on sharing progress. But for now, I know that we'll be sharing an annual report that sort of ties up the year before and commitments that were made and progress against those, and then more detail on how we'll plan on sharing this continuously throughout the year as well.
Wonderful. Dr. Mash, over to you. You mentioned that you live in one of the most inequitable economies in the world. The systems that we create seem to be a reflection of our own interiors. I'm curious, what do you think needs to change on the micro level, especially on the individual level, in order to impact the macro structures in which we live? I think you're on mute there. All right, well,
Try again, Rachel, to unmute yourself now.
Okay,
Yeah,
there we go.
unmuted.
Okay,
there we go.
I'm unmuted now. So one of the things with South Africa is when the end of apartheid in 1994, one of the things that they negotiated was that there was going to be political freedom for voting for the elections, but that there wouldn't be a transfer of capital. So the majority of the capital still stayed with the white monopoly. And as you know, in South Africa is basically built on the extractive industries, on your gold, on your mining. So we have got a huge number of people who are extremely wealthy from the extractive industries. And then what happened is that we then had Black economic empowerment. So you ended up with a small number who then joined the elite. But there wasn't any transfer of the bulk of the capital to the people. So what has actually happened since 1994 is the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer. So our townships are getting bigger and bigger. And then also we've had a lot of urbanization, a lot of migration from other African countries. So the townships are continuously growing bigger and bigger. South Africa, I'm not an economist, you're asking me really difficult questions here. But the government has we've got quite a big social grant. So we have pensions and we have there's quite a lot of
Can I rephrase the question then?
Grants. Say again?
May I rephrase the question?
Just before you do that, so what we're all pushing for now is, particularly as a result of the riots, the recent riots, is for a basic income grant. So although the basic income grant would be very small, at least it would raise people out of abject poverty, but it wouldn't do anything about the super rich. The super rich need to be taxed more. But you can rephrase the question.
I think that was good. I was curious what you think needs to happen on the individual level. So not so much economics, but what needs to change in our interiors to have a positive impact on the structures that we create.
Problem is we're stuck with corrupt politicians, hey? I think democracy is failing us globally. I mean, if you look at a democracy that can get you Donald Trump, if you look at a democracy that can get you Boris Johnson, if you look at a democracy that can get you Jacob Zuma, I'm not sure what do we replace democracy with in order to fight the 1%. I mean, I'm fascinated that we can talk about inclusive capitalism, because I think capitalism, by definition, is excluding the people at the bottom of the pile.
Certainly a challenging question. And one of the things I'm reminded of from the time that I studied politics is democracy is only as effective as the population is well educated, strong in values, willingness to hold a balance of powers and to hold the other branches accountable. And I think we've certainly gone through times in recent decades where some of those pieces have started to fail us.
Yeah. I have a question. Can I ask a question about the net zero? So one of a lot of people are saying that net zero is the wrong goal, because you get a lot of companies that are talking about getting to net zero by 2050. And what we actually need is rapid change in the next 10 years. So by setting companies a target of net zero by 2050, the danger is it becomes greenwashing, because they then will push back so that their target will be further in the future. And then also they say, well, we will get to net zero by 2050, but then how will we do that? We will do that by shifting from coal to gas. which means that there would be more explorations, for example, in Africa, which is more environmental degradation, more abuse of indigenous people. And then the other thing they will do is they say, oh, well, we'll offset. So we'll continue to produce carbon emissions, but then we will then plant, non-indigenous trees in the wrong place. Yeah, so there's quite a pushback at the moment against net zero, that we actually should be talking about reduction of carbon emissions and not talking about net zero.
And that question is posed to one of the panelists, or?
Yes.
I'm assuming that's to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Happy to answer that, Rachel. I do want to clarify that our work focused on the just aspect of the transition. There are other initiatives such as SBTI, the Climate Champions, that I think are better positioned to work with companies on the transition itself. That being said, fully recognize what you're saying in terms of, does this just become then like a check the box type exercise without really engaging with your day-to-day practices? So although the framework itself is focused on the just piece, I think there are some elements of it that can respond to the points that you raised, specifically around, for example, the point around, okay, will this continue to incentivize companies to continue to just offset their assets without regard for the indigenous communities that might be around them? One of the key pillars of the framework, as I outlined, was the community resilience piece. And a key part of that resilience is not just to design plans in silos for what you think community resilience looks like, but to really engage communities, including indigenous communities, which have historically been marginalized, and involve them very closely in any transition plans that you have as an organization from the very start, and continue to build feedback loops with them to make sure that implementation continues to happen as was designed in consultation with these groups. I think that's also part of the reason we wanted to offer this as a guide to really disincentivize any checkbox type exercises. And I think the biggest message that one of the big key takeaways I think that we would want to highlight as part of sharing out this framework is really to build the muscle of engaging with key stakeholders as you're planning, not just for the transition, as you're saying, but also for the just transition, to make sure their voices are represented throughout the process. And it's not just, oh, now I'm chasing this goal and I will do whatever it takes to chase this goal, but not really build a practice or process that takes into account what the key people that might be impacted would need from this process as well.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting.
Got another question here from one of our audience members, from Emmett Kelly. His question is, if only 9% of plastic produced is recycled, please describe an attainable recycled plastic goal and how to get there. I'm going to pass this question over to Peter. Peter, I think you might be on mute. There you are.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yeah, I think this question is for me. There are a number of things I need to say. Is that quite a lot of plastic is not recyclable as it is designed. The other thing is, right now we don't have enough infrastructure or investment into plastic recycling. And there are two ways to recycle plastic. There is the mechanical way, that basically what Plastic Bank is doing: you collect it, you wash it, you melt it in again, and then you use it. And then there's a chemical recycling where you basically take those polymers and put them back into crude oil, which is called pyrolysis. And you could, with some big investments, probably have 30% or 35% of plastic being recycled. But then you also need to redesign all plastics products into a way that they are recyclable. So they need to be monomaterials, because as soon as you mix two polymers together, especially if you have several layers, which is food packaging, has several layers often of different sorts of plastic. So you have PET and polypropylene layers on each other. You can't separate it, though that is not recyclable. So there needs to be a redesign of plastic products. And the other thing is, of course, as we see also with COVID, that the use of single-use plastic has exploded. It needs to be also a significant thought on reducing the use of single-use plastic in areas where it's not really needed. And so there are quite a number of aspects that can reduce our plastic footprint. Not saying that plastic is bad. Plastic is actually a very useful material, but to use it in a way it makes sense, and design and thinking of a whole life cycle process of the product, from the product being recyclable and in the first place. So with now about 30%, but it could go up until 50-60% if possible.
Now, Peter, I want to take the opportunity here to ask one final question since we're over time here. This is from Tommy, and it dovetails nicely with the previous question. He says, today in most large cities in developed areas, anyone can make a living or generate impactful supplemental income by driving for Uber, delivering for Amazon, etc. Will we get to a point where anyone can spend their time pursuing ecological benefits such as recycling as a meaningful source of income?
I think like in places where we work, people don't have these opportunities. Like in Port-au-Prince, you cannot drive an Uber, most likely, or very few people have a driving license even, or very few people can even read and write, you know. So for them, recycling is a very lucrative way of income, and then we can start helping people to build their lives, like offering literacy classes in Haiti, and offering also vocational training in the Philippines. Now in places in developed countries, you have basically already the government and the private sector taking that over. So that means the volume of mismanaged plastic is very, very little. So it's more like a choice of yourself, of a lifestyle choice to make sure that the plastic that you are consuming is recycled. But as a sideline, maybe one thing that many people do is maybe craft businesses. There are some people who are very creative, making crafts out of trash. That is not really recycling, but it's something where you can earn some income, I would think.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank our panelists for their contributions, for their insights, for all of the work that the three of you are doing to advance a more equitable economy for people and planet. Peter, maybe you can share with us where this recording will be archived for those that want to revisit it or share it with their friends or family.
Actually, we will send you all an email with a link to the recording. So those of you who took the time to be with us, you will get the link of the video that you can watch it again if you want to, or share it with your friends.
Wonderful. Well, I'd like to again thank our three panelists here, Esha, Dr. Mash, and Peter, for your contributions. I thank our participants. We encourage you to share this video once you get the email link, and to continue to follow these webinars as Plastic Bank continues to find leaders in the world doing good for the planet and for people. On behalf of Plastic Bank, thank you so much for joining. And We encourage you to continue to care for our planet and to promote an inclusive economy. Thank you.